What's up everyone, Coach Tony from Drawbacks Strength. Today I'm going to talk about why I'm not a big fan of a hybrid sumo stance and why people who gravitate towards that somewhat narrow sumo stance are probably going to be better off choosing a conventional stance or a wider sumo deadlift stance and just giving either one of those a fair try. So most of the time when people say that they like a hybrid sumo stance, it's because it feels a little bit better on their hips than a wide sumo deadlift stance, and it feels a little bit better on their back than a narrow conventional stance. The only problem with this is that conventional and sumo deadlifts each have their pros and cons, and when you go somewhere in between those two, you actually get rid of the benefits of both of them and combine the drawbacks of both of them. And I'll explain the benefits and the drawbacks of each of those. So with a conventional stance, we have a much narrower stance, which gives us really good power off the floor. This narrower stance gives us more speed, and when we can generate more speed, we have the better ability to grind through a sticking point midway through the lift. However, this narrower stance forces us to lean forward more, which some people can find uncomfortable on their lower back. With a sumo deadlift stance, we get out much wider. We keep our hips much closer to the bar, right on top of the bar. This slows us down. That's the main drawback, is that it's much slower off the floor, but this wider stance and keeping our hips closer to the bar reduces the range of motion that we have to move the bar. So less speed, but you don't have to move it as far. When you get in a little bit narrower like this, you give up that powerful push off the floor that you get with a conventional deadlift. And the way that I illustrate this to people is I have them try to jump as high as they can with a narrow stance and then kind of get out to that semi-sumo stance and try to jump as high as they can. You can't jump nearly as high as you would with a narrow stance. So that push off the floor is not as powerful. But when you kind of get that semi-sumo stance somewhere in between, not too wide, not too narrow, what happens then is that you can't keep your hips right on top of the bar, which is the main advantage of sumo. You still have to hinge back and your hips get very far away from the bar. So you kind of get what is classically called a wide conventional stance. I can't get down to the bar without pushing my hips way back, so I negate the main advantage of sumo. So what I would challenge people to do is, if they feel much more comfortable in that hybrid sumo stance, is to try both a wider sumo stance and a narrower conventional stance. Deadlift twice a week, do sumo on one day, conventional on the other, and see which one over time feels better. If you're not powerlifting, you can certainly do a block pull or even a trap bar deadlift to kind of try to find that comfortable position if your hips or your back are the main limiting factor. But I would just encourage people to shy away from that kind of semi-sumo stance, because it's just not going to be optimal if you're trying to lift a lot of weight. Especially if you're a power lifter, you're going to be better off going with a very narrow conventional stance or wider sumo stance, so you can take advantage of each of those lifts and the things that make them the better choice for lifting as much weight as possible.